Of all the water in the world, only 3% exists as fresh water, the water that is fit for human consumption, animal consumption, and farming. The rest is salt water, contained primarily in the oceans. This means that in principle, humanity can never run out of water. However, we need to manage the process that separates the fresh water that we need and makes it available to us. If we fail on the job of water management, we will run out of fresh water in a big way, as we are already experiencing with the drought now in progress. But why should we fail? Of the 3% that is fresh water of all the waters on the earth, only 0.3% is readily accessible on the surface of the earth in the form of lakes, swamps, and rivers. The rest exists underground as groundwater or on the ground in the form of ice. However, the most critical part is missing in this broad overview. The most critical part of all the water on Earth is the part that is contained in the atmosphere. The atmosphere is the natural path by which fresh water becomes available everywhere on the planet, even in high mountain ranges. This critical part is often ignored in the total context because the atmospheric portion of the world's water is deemed to be too minuscule in volume to be important. The atmosphere contains a mere 0.001% of all the water on Earth. However, it is this extremely minuscule portion of the water on Earth located in the atmosphere which turns out to be the most critical part of all the world's natural fresh water in the water cycle. Without atmospheric water, land-based life would not have evolved. Life on land would not exist. We ourselves would not exist without the water that is carried in the atmosphere. We exist because the water vapor in the atmosphere condenses into clouds under specific conditions. The vapor and the clouds are carried in the atmosphere with the air currents across long distances. When the conditions are right, the vapor in the air, becoming clouds, furnishes the rain that waters the earth. All natural fresh water anywhere on the earth has its origin as rain in some form. The rain enables plants to grow. It enables food to be produced in agriculture. The resulting dynamic quality of the water cycle, by which life on land becomes possible, makes water vapor the most critical component of all the water on Earth. In total volume, the atmospheric water vapor is actually not as insignificant as it is generally believed. The volume of water that exists as vapor in the atmosphere, regardless of its small total percentage, is 5 times greater than the combined volume of all the water that flows in all the rivers in the world. That's huge. So what causes a drought then when so much water is floating about in the atmosphere? Or more specifically, what is causing the California drought? The answer is basically simple. It has something to do with the special characteristics of the water molecule. In electric terms, the water molecule is bipolar in nature. It is made up of an oxygen atom with 2 hydrogen atoms attached. the atomic sharing of electron spaces, in this specific case, causes asymmetry in the attachment of the hydrogen atoms. The asymmetry is such that it gives the oxygen atom, by its exposure, a negative appearance, and the hydrogen a positive appearance. The resulting bipolarity causes the water molecules to attract one another in close proximity. The negative pole and the positive pole attract one another. In the atmosphere, the close spacing that enables the attraction to be massively effective is affected by both the prevailing temperature and the prevailing water vapor density, which together determine what is called the dew point. The dew point is critical for cloud formation. The bonding of water molecules can also be helped along by a catalyst, which typically offers a smooth surface that enhances the bipolar bonding process. An example is seen here in the case of dew collecting on a spider web. The bipolar nature of the water molecules gives the water molecules high adhesion properties on smooth surfaces, especially biological surfaces, which are smooth for this reason. These features are critical elements in the cloud-forming process. For clouds to form, a minimal density of the water vapor is required that varies with the air temperature. Clouds form when the saturation point or dew point is reached. That's when the presence of water vapor becomes visible. Water vapor by itself is invisible. If you are looking at a clear sky, you think the sky is empty and dry. In reality, you are looking at a huge volume of water which you cannot see. The water vapor molecules are too small and too finely dispersed to be visible. However, when the saturation point is reached, water molecules begin to latch onto each other in a chain reaction that begins forming around a nucleus that rapidly grows into ever larger clusters. It takes about 1 million of these larger nucleonic clusters to form a single raindrop. Now, if the water vapor density for a specific temperature is lower than the dew point requires, nothing happens. No clouds form. However, when the same water vapor becomes lifted up to higher elevations, both by the wind and by the vapor being lighter than the air, the vapor is lifted into regions of lower temperatures. There, suddenly, the dew point is reached. The dew point is reached because of the lower temperatures. One could say that the lower temperature at high elevations lowers the saturation threshold. As a result of this, clouds often form at the site of mountains, or form typically high above the ground. In California, the buoyancy of the water vapor and the wind pressure forces the air masses to rise up against the side of the mountains. In this case, when the mountains are higher than the altitude at which saturation occurs, the water vapor becomes trapped by the mountains and condenses into clouds. The clouds typically rain out onto the valley below. However, when the saturation point for the prevailing water vapor density can only be reached at a higher altitude than the top of the mountains, nothing happens. The water vapor will flow away. The drought begins. The critical factor that makes the difference in this case between rain and no rain evidently is the prevailing water vapor density that typically originates at the surface of the oceans. When the water vapor density is high, rainfall happens naturally. When the water vapor density drops below the needed threshold, nothing happens. A drought happens instead. The water vapor density that flows over the land is, as I said, largely determined by the oceans. However, do the oceans evaporate less water during times of a drought? No, they don't. The rate of evaporation is largely determined by the ocean's temperature and the radiated energy from the sun, which both remain essentially constant. That the oceans evaporate water as strongly as ever is evident at the seashore. There, as the saturation point is approached, the forming of nucleonic clusters becomes visible as fog. This happens often in the mornings at the seashore. Nothing has changed there. However, something does affect the overall water vapor density in the air, to such a large degree that drought conditions are experienced. Ironically, the now increasing drought conditions on land are caused by too much rainfall occurring over the oceans. Whenever clouds form, water vapor is leached out of the atmosphere. The water that condenses into rain has been removed from the atmosphere. When the increased cloudiness happens massively, as above the world's oceans, the global atmosphere becomes drier thereby. Of course, the drying of the atmosphere has far-reaching effects. Since the greenhouse effect of the atmosphere is largely determined by water vapor, up to 98% of it, the reduced water vapor density in the atmosphere reduces the climate moderating greenhouse effect. The diminished moderating effect results in hotter summers in some parts of the world and colder winters in other parts, or both together. The hotter summers make the drought worse. It raises the density requirement for cloud condensation and thereby increases the drought. Ironically, the increased cloudiness itself increases the rate of cloud formation. The white tops of the clouds reflect a portion of the incoming solar energy back into space, which becomes lost to the Earth's heat budget. As a result, the higher layers of the atmosphere get colder. Cloud condensation is increased by this process, by the colder air. In addition to all of that, the highly complex interlocked process of cloud nucleation is directly affected by the density of cosmic ray flux impacting on the atmosphere. It has been proven in principle with laboratory experiments that cosmic rays impacting on the atmosphere ionize the atmosphere, and that the resulting ionized particles are 100 times more attractive to water vapor. When artificial cosmic rays are injected into a test chamber with the cloud experiment at the CERN laboratory in Europe, the results were astonishing. The resulting water nucleation process that was measured at the CERN lab, which was published, went almost straight up in measured effects and off the chart. This opens a new question. The question is, What causes the increase in cosmic ray flux that is known to be affecting the Earth? The Ulysses satellite has measured a 20% increase over 10 years between 1998 and 2008. In principle, as satellite measurements confirm, cosmic ray flux is dramatically increased by the diminishing plasma density around the Sun. Since plasma powers the Sun with electric synthesizing plasma fusion occurring on its surface, the solar wind flowing away from the Sun is an indicator of the strength of the electric synthesizing plasma fusion that is happening on the Sun. The Ulysses satellite has measured a sharp reduction of the pressure of the solar wind flowing from the Sun. The diminishing solar wind density is the direct reflection of the diminished plasma density that powers the solar fusion process. It is noteworthy that the Ulysses satellite has measured a 30% reduction of the solar wind pressure between 1998 and 2008, when the mission ended, and that 2 years later, the drought began to develop in California. Obviously, the weaker solar wind density weakens the plasma heliosphere that surrounds the solar system and shields it to some degree against the highly energetic galactic cosmic ray flux that affects the Earth. The Earth is also affected by cosmic ray showers coming from the Sun. The plasma fusion process on the surface of the Sun generates large volumes of cosmic rays, though at a lower energy level. The chart shows that most of the cosmic rays reaching the Earth come from the Sun. The cosmic rays from the Sun are typically 1,000 times more numerous than the galactic cosmic rays coming from outside the solar system. The solar cosmic ray flux, in turn, is largely blocked by the plasma sphere that surrounds the Sun, by its corona, of which only a small portion is visible. As the corona weakens, however, the less dense regions allow greater showers of solar cosmic rays to pass through and impact our atmosphere. A case of this was recently felt in Texas, when in the midst of years of drought, torrential rains suddenly flooded the landscape, extended over a wide area. The flooding coincided with coronal holes occurring on the Sun. The increased cosmic ray flux evidently has such a powerful ionizing effect on the atmosphere that massive aerosol nucleation occurred that flooded the landscape, which normally wouldn't get a drop of rain because of the drought. The case of the flooding in Texas proves that there is far more water contained in the atmosphere than we care to imagine, even during drought conditions. This water can be drawn from the atmosphere with large-scale electric ionization infrastructures. While the technology is still at the beginning stage, it has successfully drawn enough moisture from the air to fill dwindling reservoirs and even to fight forest fires. The technology applied on a large scale would go a long way towards ending the California water crisis. Another simple solution to ending the California freshwater crisis would be to capture a portion of the Columbia River's outflow into the Pacific and convey it to the coasts of California in a type of large-scale garden hose floating in the sea. The Columbia River discharges 7,500 cubic meters of fresh water per second, on the average, as its outflow into the Pacific Ocean. Less than 10% of the Columbia River's unused outflow would solve the California water crisis with 100% certainty, and thereby protect a vital part of America's food production capacity. The potential solution is as easy as laying down a garden hose into the sea. But will it be done? Will society avail itself of the riches it has to meet its most urgent need? An artery made of woven basalt fibers could easily be produced large enough to enable a flow rate of 600 cubic meters of fresh water per second, enough for both North and South California. This vital infrastructure could be produced in automated industrial processes. It wouldn't take more than a year to solve the California water crisis in this manner. The floods of new irrigation water might even bring the rain back without artificial ionization. Large volumes of water vapor over the land come directly from irrigated land. High-intensity irrigation in agriculture, such as the flooding of rice fields shown here, contributes a significant amount of water vapor to the atmosphere. Plants themselves consume very little of the irrigation water that is applied. They merely use it temporarily and then evaporate most of it as vapor. Almost all of the irrigation water that is applied ends up as vapor in the atmosphere. It is here that we have some form of direct control over the process. Conservation cannot solve the drought crisis, but tends to increase it. That should tell us something. When agricultural fields are left fallow in times of a drought, and orchards are left to wither and die, the previously affected man-made contribution in the atmospheric water vapor density no longer happens. As a result, the atmospheric water density becomes reduced. That's the effect of failing policies. The water vapor dew point lifts ever farther out of reach thereby. In addition, fallow fields and dried-up lands typically increase the prevailing temperatures over the land, which puts the dew point still farther out of reach. As the consequences of such policies, the prevailing drought gets more and more severe. While the current worldwide drought is not itself caused by human action, it is nevertheless a man-made phenomenon in the sense that it could have been avoided with correct water management and water redirection, but has not been avoided. And still another factor of the water cycle needs to be considered in the context of the California drought. This factor is a large cosmic factor that the worldwide increasing drought is a fringe effect of. The factor is the Ice Age transition that is currently in progress, that the Ulysses spacecraft saw an early part of. As I said earlier, the Ulysses satellite had measured a 30% reduction of the solar wind pressure over a space of 10 years between 1998 and 2008. The diminished solar wind corresponds to the weakening of the incoming plasma density that powers the sun, with the measured rate of diminishment being projected forward in a linear manner. The solar wind will diminish to zero in the 2030s, after which the sun will likely go inactive in the 2050s, with 70% less energy being radiated by then. Of course, along the way of this happening, we will see ever larger climate effects occurring all over the world, and these too will be likewise mere fringe effects of the weakening process towards the sun going inactive. The California drought that began quite early in the solar diminishing process now appears to be intensifying, as one would expect by the nature of the diminishing dynamic processes. This means that the drought will spread rather than diminish. The Columbia River itself may largely dry up in the course of this spreading drought. All this means that long before such things happen, a new freshwater resource will have to be developed and be operating. Most of the great rivers of the world will become severely stressed during an ice age, even in the habitable zone. Ice core samples from the last ice age tell us that we can expect a 5-fold reduction in precipitation. This is huge, and it must be taken into consideration. The ice age dynamics are forcing us to rethink the very concept of freshwater supplies and with it the dynamics of human living, from economics to finance to politics to food and social cooperative living. One option would be to tap into the outflow of the Amazon River and to direct a portion of its outflow to California. The Amazon is rich enough in fresh water by its being located on the equator that it will likely be a major freshwater resource for the entire world during ice age conditions. Even during ice age conditions, the Amazon would likely have the freshwater potential equal to the production potential of 22,000 large-scale nuclear-powered desalination plants. America would likely be allotted a share of it. While the somewhat larger diversion from the outflow of the Amazon all the way to the coast of California via a sea level tunnel below Panama would be much larger than the Columbia River diversion. The feed of it would not be a big deal technologically, but it would instead take a lot of international reorganization, goodwill, and honest science to get it done. These are the areas in which America had little experience lately. Another option would be for society to simply produce its own fresh water with technological means. Reverse osmosis desalination is presently the leading-edge desalination technology. Nevertheless, the process is ineffective in the larger context of food production in an ice age super drought. A large-scale nuclear-powered desalination plant, as the one shown here, produces slightly over 2 cubic meters of fresh water per second. In order to meet California's present need, a whopping 300 such large plants would be required. These won't be constructed, even if they are needed in an Ice Age world 30 years from now. The space for 300 nuclear plants appear to be not available. However, ample space is available in the oceans, where large desalination facilities can be more easily located and would operate there in a self-powered mode. This too isn't an easy concept for society to get used to and to implement. A solution for the problem associated with large-scale desalination is possible by placing the plants deep into the oceans where the real estate is free. In addition, when the desalination process operates at a great depth, around 5,000 meters deep, the weight differential between the salt water and fresh water would be sufficient to cause the desalination process to be self-powering. Further, in addition, the deep ocean desalination process would solve the world's CO2 crisis, together with the water crisis. Yes, the Earth is gripped with an unfolding crisis of CO2 starvation. The CO2 crisis is rarely acknowledged. We face a severe crisis, not because we have too much CO2 in the atmosphere, but because we have too little of it. In long historic terms, the atmospheric CO2 is presently at the lowest level it has been since life began on our planet. In an Ice Age environment, that minuscule level will diminish further, below the level where botanical starvation occurs, and plants die for the lack of CO2. This looming starvation needs to be prevented, because we all do depend on plants for our food supply. The Earth needs a tenfold increase in atmospheric CO2 density. This can be accomplished in a symbiotic fashion with deep ocean reverse osmosis desalination. It is foolish to disassociate the deepening world drought from the dynamics of the unfolding Ice Age transition that it is a part of, because neither will be thereby seriously addressed. Inversely, by understanding the dynamics of both, the correct measures will be developed to deal with the resulting effects, whatever they may be. The Ice Age transition is real. It is unfolding with far greater consequences than most people can imagine. In roughly 30 years, the electric weakening of the plasma streams that flow through our solar system will become too weak to maintain the sun, which will go inactive at this time until the electric conditions recover and the next interglacial period begins, roughly 90,000 years into the future, when the threshold line is exceeded once again. When 70% less solar energy is radiated, the next Ice Age glaciation cycle begins on Earth, that typically lasts for 90,000 years. The California water crisis should be seen as an early warning precursor of what is to come. Ice core records tell us that the Earth has gone through many Ice Age cycles in the past, but they don't tell us what this implies for a 7 billion world population that has large parts of it presently living in regions that become uninhabitable under the 70% diminished solar radiation. Ice core records don't reflect that the regions outside the tropics become rapidly uninhabitable, so that the nations living there will have to abandon their home and relocate into the tropics. Canada, Russia, most of the European nations and part of the USA, India and China, and so on, are so affected. The Ice Age dynamics force a new world upon us for the next 90,000 years that has never been experienced before. This is extremely difficult to accept, especially those radical changes, and more so to make preparations for them, such as placing the relocated agriculture afloat onto the tropical seas, together with floating cities and so on. The cause for the Ice Age cycles is located far distant in interstellar space, beyond our reach and our control. In space, the plasma streams are evident by the string-like formations of stars. The strings are formed by electric interaction. And being electric in nature, the interstellar plasma streams have electric resonance cycles, which in the case of the Earth determine the timing of the ice ages. Since the world population was extremely sparse during the glaciation periods, in the range of 1 to 10 million people worldwide, this may have been possibly for the lack of fresh water resources. Extremely little is known about the conditions of these times and their impact on human living. In the world of the dimmer sun, fresh water becomes scarce. That's what we need to get ready for. The result will be somewhat inconvenient, but we can live with that by relocating most of humanity afloat onto the tropical seas and supply the freshwater needs by producing our own fresh water with deep ocean desalination. And this while large parts of the Earth become an ice desert. The California drought should be regarded as a training opportunity and as a window into the future. The future looks grim should we continue to fail ourselves on this count as we presently do. The California water crisis should never have happened. It is man-made by society's refusal in the past to create the infrastructures that could have avoided the crisis. Had the Navapa project been built in the 1960s that President Kennedy had promoted as a key to the future, California would not be in a crisis today. The project was designed to divert a portion of the northern rivers that flow into the Arctic Ocean southward through Canada to the southern USA and Mexico. The construction period would have spanned 50 years. Today, more efficient options are available, but will we move forward with them even at this late date? The Navapa option is already closed because of its long construction period. There is not enough time left remaining to carry out such a project before the Ice Age begins, which will disable it. In comparison, the Columbia River diversion can be accomplished much more quickly, possibly in a single year. It could serve California effectively till the Ice Age starts, when it too becomes disabled. Before the Ice Age starts, however, a worldwide freshwater network would need to be built that is fed by the great tropical rivers that will likely continue to function under Ice Age conditions, such as the Amazon River, the Congo River, and a number of lesser rivers. By then, all of the northern nations would have relocated themselves into the tropics, onto new land in the form of floating modules extending across the equatorial sea, supplied with fresh water produced by deep ocean reverse osmosis desalination, which by then will have uplifted the atmospheric CO2 level sufficiently, potentially tenfold, for large-scale agriculture to continue under Ice Age conditions. But will we do it? Will we meet the Ice Age challenge? Will we create what is necessary to avoid those ever larger tragedies to come, of which the California water crisis is just the beginning? Or will we remain idle and meet the next Ice Age in 30 years without any infrastructures having been created for continued human existence to be possible in an Ice Age world? The answer to this question is critical. We are running out of time. The present commitment in California is to do nothing. Society is committed not to address this crisis. The current commitment in society is to let its people die. The official commitment in the oligarchic world of top-down imperial control is to sidetrack humanity into radical carbon reduction genocidal schemes under the global warming dogma, in order to prevent humanity from having a universally rich future, which humanity has within its grasp by scientific and technological means. The water crisis is therefore man-made and can be reversed by stepping out of the dogmatic traps and applying the technological means that we have amply available. The oligarchic world is desperate to prevent this potential because the potential is great for humanity to create itself a rich future where slavery, looting, and wars for looting and other games of empire have no place. Humanity should be far more staunchly committed to its welfare as human beings by giving itself the grand future that is within reach. On this front, however, we have precious little time remaining to break ourselves out of the oligarchic prism of insanity and give ourselves a chance to live. The time constraint that demands immediate mobilization is dictated by the astrophysical clock of the Ice Age challenge. The Ice Age dynamic sequence is unrelenting, but its challenge can be met. If we choose to follow the heart of our humanity, which is also the heart of civilization, a grand path lies before us to the brightest imaginable future, even in an Ice Age world. The necessary path before us, when we get into this, takes us far from today's landscape of war, slavery, looting, deprivation, destruction, depopulation, and genocide. The grand option is to awake the heart. It should be reflected in California today, just as it had been in the past, though the challenge is somewhat greater today in scope, though not in principle. The great potential for human society would be reflected today all over the world, if the heart of human society would be raised up again to higher levels of humanity where it supports civilization, which had been the norm in America until the modern age, the age of emptiness, of fascism of the Western Empire. The age of man is fast on track of becoming the norm in some of the more modern countries on Earth, like Russia and China and so on. China has just completed the largest water management, flood control, and electricity generating infrastructure that enables water diversion on an unprecedented scale for increased food production and the meeting of other numerous human needs. Much of it was done from the ground up, in record time. The speed and the scope of the achievement illustrates to some degree the vast scientific, technological, and creative potential of humanity when its heart becomes free to challenge the limits. It illustrates also to some degree the boundless nature of man. The more than 3,000 kilometers long overland water transfer project in China, most of which is in operation, that eventually will be connected to the Three Gorges Dam Reservoir, renders the potential water-in-water transfer project from the Columbia River outflow to the coast of California a rather minuscule engineering challenge in physical terms. The American water-in-water transfer project would stand out, nevertheless, as a key part of the startup project for the worldwide water transfer network that becomes critical as the worldwide drought expands towards the start of the next ice age in potentially the 2050s. The American water-in-water transfer project would also serve America as a technological foundation for its water conveyance across the sea from the deep ocean reverse osmosis desalination facilities that require to be located hundreds of kilometers offshore, where the deep oceans are located. America will likely require such a water supply system when the ice age begins, when rainfall may stop in what remains still habitable by then. The American water-in-water transfer project would also serve as a necessary pioneering step for the whole of humanity that may have similar requirements when the ice age begins. With all this considered, the Columbia River diversion will likely happen, and it will likely happen soon. It will also likely happen for another reason that would reflect the nature of our humanity, that renders the human being the greatest gem on earth. At the higher level of our universal humanity, life, truth, and love are the great guiding banner headlines that define us, that are rightly valued as the greatest defining gems that the society of human beings has and is able to build on and stand secure on. Just as a tripod stands secure in any terrain, so the tripod structure of our humanity, life, truth, and love, affords a secure foundation for building on. This foundation itself reflects a still higher tripod superstructure that it proceeds from, which too is profoundly reflected in its own right in human civilization. The qualities of the superstructure tripod are the root qualities that set us apart from the animal world onto a platform unequaled in the universe of life, where we stand with a creative spirit, with a productive and harmonizing mind, and the capability to grasp the principle of the universe as a resource for boundless development. And in between the structure of man and its superstructure stands the quality of soul, in which we find our identity as the gem of the universe, the diamond of creation, with a native sparkle that reflects the sun. Nor does it really matter that this diamond has been dragged into the mud in recent years. A diamond remains a diamond still. When the mud is washed off, the sparkle from within comes to light again, furnished by the tripod structure of man and its superstructure. When the diamond is secure, all parts work together, reflecting and combining the riches of the light of man. Of course, if the soul is not washed clean and the diamond remains buried in the mud, there is no light in the world. When there is no light in the world, the darkness of fascism rules. Consequently, the hope for a future vanishes from the landscape. When the heart dies, when the value of life, truth and love is reduced to zero in the sight of society, the chaos of fascism rules, in which the fabric of civilization is seen no more and its emptiness shines through. In real terms, fascism is not a power. Emptiness is not a power. Darkness is not a power. It is merely a void without light. Fascism is a void where never an iota of good is created. The system of empire is doomed thereby. It is built on fascism and has never created an iota of good that enriches human society. In the qualitative sense, fascism is a form of darkness, a void without light. Emptiness is its real name, and no amount of force can forever conceal it. The core of fascism adds up to zero. Fascism is a zero-sum game because it has nothing of substance within it. All forms of fascism have this vacuity at their core, this inner emptiness, by which fascism is doomed together with the system of empire that is built on fascism. Both the structure and substructure of empire, no matter how monumental they appear, are structures of emptiness, structures without a trace of humanist light, structures that become gateways to annihilation. The system of empire can be likened to a black star, where all its aspects of emptiness are linked together. Fortunately, a black star rules in the mind only for as long as its mythology, that is claimed to be truth, is accepted. In the real universe, no such thing exists as a black star, or a black hole as it is also referred to. Black holes exist only in the imagination. No such view as this hypothesized graphic image illustrates has ever been photographed, because it does not exist. This myth rules only by the force of deception, as the flat earth myth has once ruled in the imagination until astrophysical science provided the truthful perception that has opened many horizons. In like manner will the dawn of the substance of our humanity outshine and obsolete the empty dreams of fascism and its system of empire, where all is mythology and nothing has substance. The battle for civilization has become critical in recent times. It is a battle to heal a disease in civilization that has festered for far too long already and has deceived much of humanity into becoming impotent slaves to it. Unfortunately, the insanity has reached such a depth in lack of humanity that the annihilation of the human species has become a real possibility. We live closer to the midnight hour than we have ever lived before. Russia has been forced into a military confrontation worse than the Cuban Missile Crisis. It must respond within less than 5 minutes to an attack or a perceived attack by the West. The West has nuclear missiles stationed around Russia's entire border from the Baltic to the Black Sea. Such insanity, with many similar forms of insanity pervading politics, science and economics, have crippled the heart of a people with perceived impotence. A similar crippling commitment has been made in respect to the California water crisis. The commitment is that the crisis will not be addressed, but will be rendered worse with further fascist insanity. The effect will be as deadly in the long run as a nuclear war would be. The current fascist message to humanity is that the water-rich era is over. Conserve and die in the poverty of escalating water prices, as if the looting of society could bring the water back, or conservation would end the creeping drought. The fascist insanity has grown to such proportions that a new and radical assault on carbon in the air has been announced under the global warming doctrine that is already killing upwards to 100 million people a year with the biofuel scam, even while man-made global warming is physically impossible, as numerous basic physical facts illustrate. We have a long battle before us to heal the heart of the crippling disease of empire and fascism in order to get enough of our humanity rebuilt that would enable us to meet the greatest challenge that humanity has ever faced, which is the Ice Age challenge. The Ice Age challenge is enormous. It cannot be avoided. We can avoid nuclear war by simply scrapping the nuclear weapons, which we can do in a week when we become human again. Likewise, we can avoid the further tragedies of the deepening drought by bringing water to where it is needed. But we cannot avoid the Ice Age challenge. If the heart remains dark and stone cold and latched to killing, the Ice Age challenge will not be met, nor will the California water crisis be met for the same reason. When we see some real, decisive movements happening on the California waterfront, then a spark of hope is seen on the horizon that a healing has begun in the heart. Then the Ice Age challenge may yet be turned into the new and profound Renaissance, with the light of the heart unfolding its immense creative nature that we have the potential for right now.